Morning, everybody. Today we're learning L'Zecher Nishmas Harav. Wow. Baruch Hashem, everybody knows it, but heart has it on their lips and in their hearts. Today we want to continue, although a bit more carefully, with the role of Jewish comedians and the Torah perspective. And hopefully we'll have a small visit from Eddie Cantor and Jack Benny, and we'll see who else shows up. But first, on first things that have to be first, we have to look at a statement from Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz. Now, Rabbi Yonason Eibeshitz shows up a lot around here, and he had a very important statement about Jews in exile, and certainly when he lived in Germany in the late 1600s and 1700s, life was a lot more dangerous for the average Jew than it is now. Don't mean to belittle anything, but he says the follows. Kasher Amarti, this is located in Yaros Davash, Forest of Honey, Volume 2, Lecture 8. He says, I have said many times, Kasher Amarti Kama Pa'amim, Arov Averis Yesh Lanu Teretz. On most sins that Jewish people do, there's an answer. Now notice we're being very careful. The rabbi doesn't say there's an excuse, he says there's an answer. We all know that's not the same thing. An excuse would exonerate you. An answer would lessen the punishment, how Hashem deals with it. But Rabbi Eibeshitz says, on most sins there is an answer. Why? Ki koved hagalut mevi otanu lidei hakol. The heaviness of being in exile brings us to the hands of all. Now, there are even Gentile scholars, not enough of them, but there have even been Gentile scholars who have written, and they wrote this back in the 1700s, and they wrote that we know there are certain character traits of the Jewish people we Gentiles do not like, but he said we must honestly realize we made them that way by pushing Jews into ghettos and restricting them from where they can live and what their livelihood can be. Anything that we feel Jews do is underhanded or sneaky, we're getting back what we put into them. Now, next time I said I must write down which scholar I saw it in. He said it very eloquently, and he just said, the more we Gentiles persecute and mistreat the Jews, the more we're going to get it back. So he says, you can't blame the Jews for everything they do. It's our doing. Very bold statement, and that was before the time of sensationalism. He said it because he thought it should be said. Rabbi Eibeshitz says, the weight of the Jews in exile and everything that comes with it. And in America, I know it shows up in a different way. Everyone I speak to says anti-Semitism hasn't gone away. It's just changed its face. It's more subtle. Maybe the anti-Semitic know how to hide themselves a little bit better, but it's around. It's around. And anti-Semitism doesn't have to be somebody throwing a rock at you, or, as I had when I was a teenager, being called Christ killer and things like that. A few doors in Monticello, New York, a lot of Jews over there. In Monticello, New York, in the 70s, we had a minister that lived down the street who actually was a nice guy. His kid knocked on the door, and this was a kid that I played with and my brother played with. Knocked on the door, this guy Kenny, and we open the door, and he says, "You're Jewish, right?" "Yeah." "Well, you're going to hell because you don't believe in Jesus." So I went and I told my parents, and they were disturbed, and they told his father. The father came over in tears, embarrassed, couldn't stop apologizing, and he goes, "Let me tell you the problem. We made the mistake of sending our child to a quote-unquote religious summer camp. And in that quote-unquote religious summer camp, he picked up things like this. We've been having problems with him in the house, but I can't apologize to you enough. And of course, my father being a survivor, this was just what we needed. But wherever a person lives, unfortunately, anti-Semitism is still around for hopefully only a little bit longer. Rabbi Eibish says, though, but for most things Jews do, we have a teretz. We have a teretz. He brings a Yalkut Shimoni that says on Yom Kippur, just a few days ago, Notel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Avonot Yisrael, Hashem takes the sins of Israel, V'notnam al Sar Shel Esav, and he puts them onto the officer of Esav. The officer of Esav, everybody remembers, he is the angel that had the wrestling match with Yaakov Avinu. Now, does that have anything to do with Jews? I have heard that an inordinate amount of Orthodox Jews like to watch wrestling in the 40s and 50s. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know if they... I hope they don't think Gorgeous George or Junkyard Dog has anything, or Ivan the Giant Guy. I hope they don't think he has anything to do with Yaakov Avinu, our patriarch, wrestling with Esav. But the Medrash does say that on Yom Kippur, if they, hopefully the Jews come to shul and do the right thing, God will take the sins of the Jews and put them on the angel of Esav. And the rabbi explains, God forbid, God is not obstructing judgment. God is just saying, I have to judge the Jews for their sins, but you, angel of Esav, and your people that pressure the Jews and oppress them in Galut, it's your fault a lot of what they do. But here's what I want. Says Rabbi Eibishitz, Jewish people, I could make answers for a lot of things you do. It's not always easy being a Jew, but it is good to be a Jew, but it's, nothing good is easy. And the exile and things we endure are a lot of terrible things. However, says Rabbi Eibishitz, I have no answer for the following things. Now, if the things he's about to say are things you like to do, please don't get offended. A lot of things you have to reassess. What was the status in Germany when he said this? What was going on? What's going on in our world? But somewhere in the middle, there will be an application for us. So says Rabbi Eibishitz, I have answers for all kinds of things Jewish people do that they shouldn't do. Oh yes, the pressure of the exile. But I cannot defend you for going to, and he writes it out in German, I can't defend you for going to comedy shows. And then he says, I can't defend you for going to Aleph, Vav, Pei, Ayin, Reish, Ayin, which spells opera. Not Oprah, she wasn't born. Opera. And he says, which shows am I talking about? Now this is altogether amazing. I didn't realize that in, let's say, 1685 or 1695, Jewish people could even get into the German comedy shows, opera. But he says, my definition is laughter and lightheadedness in a place of a gathering of people who are full of iniquity. He says, don't tell me that you're going to these entertaining shows because the pressure of exile is pushing you that I must go to the German opera and comedy. He goes, I'm very sorry. He goes, I'm not making any terutzim for you. He goes, let me tell you what it really is. When you hear that Jews are going to participate in German opera and German comedy, he goes, it's time to cry, it's time to mourn. Al tismach Yisrael, Jews, what kind of happiness is that for you? El gil ka'amim, you're sitting with our oppressors, and you're sitting and laughing with them, and he quotes King Solomon, Ulesimcha mazu oseh, and there are some, now there's a contradiction, the Gemara makes it clear, some kinds of simcha Shlomo Melech likes, sometimes he says it's a waste of time. But Rabbi Eibeshitz says, I'll defend you on all kinds of sins. But going to the German opera and the German comedy shows, I have nothing to say for that. And you're there, you're laughing with a guy that last week or tomorrow, who knows what he's going to do to you or to your uncle. And we hate to say it, but there's a saying in Halacha. There was a question about buying an esrog in a certain place, if it was a kosher esrog. And some rabbi said, yeah, that esrog's kosher. This can be found in Tamei HaMinhagim. Yeah, that esrog's kosher, but they say, why would you buy an esrog that grew on a tree on soil that's plowed with Jewish blood? What do you want that esrog for? What are you doing there? So Rabbi Eibeshitz says, I'm not telling you to walk around sour face, but who told you to go to the German opera and comedy shows? He goes, let me remind you. The administering angels were upset with Achashverosh, not Jewish. Why? Because the temple was destroyed and he was making a party and he was using things from the temple and he got in trouble and the Jews got in trouble for attending that party when Mordechai told him not to go. He goes, now look at that. It already was close to 70 years after the destruction of the temple. And Achashverosh makes a party, and he's using things to the base of Mikdash. Jews are there, and everybody gets in trouble. So he says, what are we to answer? He says, there is no temple. Jews are always on the move, and you waste your time, and who are you laughing with? So he says, for participating in such shows, I can't defend you, and he uses very powerful words. Alzeh, for this, ein marpei v'teretz klal. I have no medicine or answer at all, b'avoseinu harabim, in our great sins. Now don't get Rabbi Eibeshitz wrong. From everything we know about Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, he had a sense of humor. He had a great sense of humor. In his childhood, we find him being funny in the house with his parents. When priests would start up with him, he was saying funny things all the time. The man had a sense of humor, no question. But he said there's a time and there's a time. And he says it does have to be in our minds, the status of the Jewish people and what's going on around us, and we have to be honest with ourselves. So here he's giving a general clarion warning. Simcha is okay, but figure out what kind of simcha, when, where, and how, and who you're doing it with. Because he's basically giving a warning. I mean, for us, in hindsight, it's almost appalling. Jews went to sit at a comedy show, sitting next to the Germans in the 1700s. I mean, it's just some people would try to say, oh well, look at the progressiveness, but he said no. They weren't exactly the Nazis in 1680, 1690, but he says, what are you doing? What's the right kind of simcha? Okay. However, let's take some lessons from the role of the Jewish comedian, some things that I think our rabbis would approve of. Now, the Jewish comedians that we know of they were no big rabbis or anything like that, but a lot of the things they had to say were very, very important. Now, when we go to war, we Jews have a lot of rules, and we're very, very careful. And we're very, very real. However, you all know that the Torah says that the Kohen Gadol, the battle Kohen Gadol, the battle priest, before we go out to war, they examine everybody, and if there's someone who recently has a new house, or a new vineyard, or a new wife, they send you home. Now, and the attitude isn't, well, it's a time of war, just forget everything, that's it, The hay with your house and your vineyard and your wife. Just forget everything, it's wartime. No. Jewish people don't say that. Now, there's a lot of detailed rules, but Jewish people don't say that. We say, no. We say, you got married, you need to at least have a solid year with your wife, enjoy your house for a while. We don't say, that's it, all simchas canceled. We don't do that. Now, don't get me wrong. There are certain kinds of wars where the Gemara says in Sota, Rabbi Weissman will be teaching in Daf Yomi in a month or so, and over there it says there are certain kind of wars where we do tell the Chassan and Kala to be quartermasters. They're working the supply lines, they're not in the heat of battle. But in times of battle, though, that's a crucial thing. Now, you've all read stories about what it was like here in America during World War II, maybe World War I. You know, there was at least the World Series that was canceled. You know, there was rationing. Older female relatives in your family will say there was a period where you couldn't have so much sugar, you couldn't have so much coffee. Ladies had to give up their nylon stockings to the military to make parachutes. You know, fine. Things were somber. They did tone it down. However, Eddie Cantor. Okay, so Eddie Cantor did, you're going to have a hard time finding a Jewish comedian who did more for the United States military and the state of Israel than Eddie Cantor. Eddie Cantor, during the war, did a non-stop telethon without sleep for a day in San Francisco to raise incredible amounts of money for war bonds. And the state of Israel, he was his whole life raising money for. But January 14th, 1942, and this can be found in a wonderful book from your shul's library, The Haunted Smile by Dr. Lawrence Epstein. Quote from Eddie Cantor. Now, you know, if it's January 14th, 1942, that means Pearl Harbor was a month and 1 week before, right? December 7th, 1941. After Pearl Harbor, Eddie Cantor said, high spirits need to be one of this country's first priorities. Because you had soldiers fighting there who you had to keep in good spirits, and you had people back home working very hard to churn out the weaponry. Not far across Annapolis was very busy, World War II, and then across in Baltimore, you had Bethlehem Steel, all over the place, 24/7, people churning out weaponry, and there was a lot of role reversal, a lot of changes for people. So that's why Eddie said, you got to keep high spirits up, because we all have to work very hard. And it's not being sacrilegious. I mean, you have to know your limits, but he said you have to have high limits. You have to have high spirits. Now, Eddie made a joke. Now, if you would say this joke now to the wrong person, they would say, oh, that's not PC. That's not politically correct. You can't say that. So let me preface something. In Baltimore, we have a street, the University of Maryland Hospital. You shouldn't have to go there. It's called Redwood Street. Redwood Street. That's not the real name of the street. If you look in a little bit of Baltimore history, the name of that street is German Street. And it may be already from World War I, the city of Baltimore didn't want that. They didn't want a street in Baltimore named German Street. It became Redwood Street. And they changed it, and that's the way it's going to stay. So now, someone would say, oh, you can't do that. You're insulting German Americans. It's already done. For 2 wars. But let me tell you what Eddie Cantor said, and this was an example of a kind of humor that Eddie felt was appropriate to help keep people's spirits up, because you and I can't appreciate it. Now, Bruce, you were a little Bruce then. You were around. The rest of us were not. And whoever's watching in TV land over there, I don't know if you were around, but most history books agree that America should have lost that war. On paper, We were not ready for that war, and we really should have lost. So, this is a joke, he said. Now, the old-time Jewish comics were very good at dialects and accents. Very good at that. So, one show, Eddie Cantor, Olav Shalom, who again, his real name was Yisrael Ishkovitz. That's his real name. But on one show, Eddie put on a German accent, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, there is no food shortage in Germany. Do not worry about the German people. There's no food shortage. I will tell you how I know. Last night, we had a big weenie roast in Germany. The Allied planes came over with their bombs, and they cooked the city of Frankfurt. So you see, they had Frankfurters. They had a big weenie roast because our planes cooked the Frankfurt city." Now, if you would say that joke nowadays, I don't know what they do for you, but during World War II, when we were terrified Hitler was going to take over the planet, and both Jew and non-Jew were scared, Eddie Cantor could make jokes like that. Now you say, oh my, you can't say it. Yeah, but then he said it, because he felt you had to say it, because you got to keep the spirits up. By the way, actually I have the figure over here. Dr. Epstein says, in 1944, when Eddie Cantor did the broadcast for 24 hours straight in San Francisco for war bonds, in 24 hours, and this is 1944 money, he sold $37.6 million worth of war bonds. 24 hours, 1944 money. That's a big deal. So don't ever let anybody tell you Jews didn't do enough for the war effort. All right? So that's how he felt. And there were other comedians, both Jews and non-Jews, that they felt to an extent. You had to watch the limit. Now, let me go back to another time other than the war. Jack Benny. Now, Jack Benny is most famous for his cheap jokes. On the TV, he was successful in vaudeville and radio and TV. On his old TV show, they say you could see a payphone in his living room. Made everybody, including himself, pay to make a phone call. And part of the greatness of Jack Benny, whose real name was Binyamin Ben Meir, from Waukegan, Illinois. But his name was Binyamin Ben Meir. His mother's name was Emma. And Jack Benny was a master of teaching people it's okay to laugh at yourself. It's okay to laugh at yourself. And in his shows, he would make fun of himself. Rochester was always making fun of him, and that was all part of Benny's idea. And you have to understand, that was a liberation for the black people. Because to have a show back then where a black housekeeper is making his white Jewish master the butt of his jokes, that was absolutely unheard of. There was no such thing as that. It was in some way liberating. And by the way, I don't know if you ever saw any of the shows, Rochester was a black actor, African American. He was famous for his voice. Besides his talent, he had a very, very scruffy voice. He would say, "What it is, Mr. Benny?" So everybody thinks that was an act. He had a very, very funny voice. The history books say it was no act. Rochester, he does have a real name. When Rochester was a kid, he was a newspaper boy. And you know how the newspaper boys used to yell, "Extra, extra, read all about it." So little Rochester did that too much, and he lost his voice permanently. He never had the corrective surgery for it. So if you ever see an old clip on the computer, there's a million of them, of Rochester saying, "What can I do for you now, Mr. Benny?" That's his real voice. And what he thought was a curse turned out to be a blessing. It made him famous and made him a lot of money. Now, so Jack Benny taught people you could laugh at yourself, and he wasn't forced into doing those scripts. But Dr. Epstein feels that he did a service to Jews and non-Jews alike. Jack was doing the cheap character Depression time. Now, the thing was, in that period, the average family was feeling bad. Mothers and fathers could not support their kids. It was very, very hard. Fathers felt emasculated. I'm not a good husband. I'm not a good father. I'm not supporting my wife. I'm not a good breadwinner. And they were trying their best, but it was a depression time. And people had to watch everything. Everything really, really made a difference. You didn't have because you couldn't have. So that time period had a lot of people, especially the fathers, feeling guilt, emotional depression, and anger. Now, a lot of people thought they'd never get out of it. And you do know that there were many, many people, especially millionaires, who committed suicide. They jumped out of skyscraper windows. They did it. Now, Eddie Cantor had a lot of jokes about the depression that we wouldn't say nowadays. I'll tell you about Benny in a second. Eddie Cantor had a joke, depression time. And I told this to senior citizens who lived through the depression, and they all cracked up. I didn't understand it. Eddie Cantor said, a businessman checks in a hotel. And he says, how much for one night? He says, well, it depends while you're using the room. If you want to sleep over, it's $10. If you're just checking in to jump out and kill yourself, I'll let you have it for $5. Now, to us, that's a terrible, morbid joke. I'm not telling it exactly right. I told this to people in their late 80s and 90s. They laughed out loud. Eddie Cantor had a joke. Well, it's a depression. I need to go into a new business. I know. I'll go into caskets. I hear they're selling a lot of them lately. That's a terrible joke. But all the people who lived through it, they thought it was funny because it helped people cope, even though it was morbid. So Benny did as follows. And this is the language of Dr. Epstein. The Benny character of being cheap helped audience members laugh at that frightening part of themselves of feeling so bad that they couldn't make money. Additionally, because of his exaggerated stinginess, I'll tell you a routine in a second. Jack Benny in the routines was stingy and cheap beyond. What Benny did, he was so ridiculously cheap in his jokes about himself. The message was, it's normal to be cheap. You don't have to be as crazy as Jack Benny, but if you're a cheapskate to feed your family and not to get evicted, that's normal. Now this is a great quote. He was giving his listeners emotional permission not to feel bad about watching their money. And as Benny himself put it, my character sustained because I played a character who had all the faults and frailties of mankind. Every family has that kind of a person. So the point is, he was liberating people because people felt terrible. So in his comedy, aimed mostly at himself, he was showing people you could laugh at yourself. And I'm extreme with my cheapness, but if you want to be normally cheap to get by till God makes times better, go for it. So that kind of comedy, a lot of historians feel that was helpful to people. Rather than just saying, okay, it's a depression, it's very bad time, God is judging us, that's it, no laughter, no nothing, yet forget it, who knows what people would have done to themselves. I'll just give you a very funny sample. This clip is available on YouTube, but I think Dr. Epstein, his insights are incredible. One time, Rochester played a card game with Jack Benny on the show, and he beat him, And the bet was that if Jack lost, he had to do all the housekeeping for one day, including shopping. All right, it's a very, very funny segment. It starts off with Jack Benny in a lady's apron mopping the floor. Very, very funny. Then he goes shopping. So he comes into the supermarket, and of course it's funny because you see the prices in those days. It's very funny. He comes in, the fruit man says, "You need fruit?" "Yes, I need fruit." "What do you have on sale, sir?" "Apples." "Okay, I always buy what's on sale. Give me the apples." And this is classic Jack Benny. So the fruit man, he says, "I want a pound of apples." Weighs the apples. He's, "Okay, sir, a pound, 2 ounces. Jack screams, "No! A pound! I said a pound! I will not pay 1 more cent. I say a pound, and a pound." "Sir, what's the big deal? It's a pound, 2 ounces. This 2 ounces." No. I will only pay for a pound. Now you make it a pound." So the Italian fruit guy, all ethnic humor back then, says, "Okay, I gotta fix it for you. You want to get rid of 2 ounces?" So the guy takes an apple, takes 3 big bites, put the half-eaten apple back in and said, "Okay, now you got exactly a pound. You happy?" Jack's happy. Then a lady puts out on the table free cakes. So each person goes by, takes a slice. Jack goes by, he clears off the whole table in his shopping cart, takes all the free pieces, and then he looks back what's left, the sign that says free. He puts his hand on the sign to take the sign, he figures, okay, I'll leave the sign. Then he goes to the butcher. "I want a pound of hot dogs. I want a pound of hot dogs." So the guy weighs the hot dogs. "Sir, 1 pound, 3 ounces. "No!" Jack starts screaming, "I will not pay more. It's got to be exactly a pound." So the butcher had enough of this guy and his cheapness. "For meat, you can't pay 3 more ounces." He goes, "You want exactly a pound, huh, sir?" "Yes, not a half ounce more." So the guy takes a hot dog, takes a big, big bite of the hot dog, exactly a pound. He says, no, you can keep your hot dog. Then Jack turns around, he figures, I'm going to fix these people in the store, what they do to me when I ask for a pound. I'm going to fix that guy, and I'm going to do something that he won't be able to get me back. He says, sir, I changed my mind. I'd like to get exactly a pound of raw liver. And Jack turns away from the counter. He goes, he'll never get me this time. He can't bite into the raw liver. He'll have to do something. Again, weighs the liver. Sir, 1 pound, 2 ounces. I won't have that. I won't have that. It got to be exactly a pound. So Jack figures, I got him now. He can't bite into the raw liver to get rid of the 2 ounces. Butcher turns around. Hey, Rover, come here, boy. And you hear, woof, 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 woof. He says, then Jack can't take it. He says, let's get out of there. All right, but be it as it may, through the whole routine, he's making fun of himself, and historians feel that for the time, it loosened people up to help them to keep going and not to feel so bad. And that kind of comedy, like we said it before, but at Dvar Torah, comedy in the right measure, in the right amount, can help people go on. And you know, that's something that I'm sure if we look around, we can find parts in the Torah. Of course, the ultimate master of all this is the best person to end with, is Rabbi Akiva. We all know the Gemara at the end of Makos. Rabbi Akiva and some other great sages were walking through the ruins of Jerusalem, and they started crying. That would seem to be the appropriate thing to do, but Rabbi Akiva laughed. And they said, Rabbi, how can you laugh? How can you laugh at a time like this? We're walking through the ruins of Jerusalem. And he said, how could you not laugh? Jerusalem was destroyed and ruined. That shows the prophecies came true. So just like the bad prophecies came true, the hopeful prophecies of redemption of Jerusalem and Israel being restored, they will come true too. So he says, I must laugh. I must be cheerful. That's the way to go. Next, over the bottom line is the messages from our Jewish comedians is we can't give up. We've been in trouble before. We've been at death's door before. Bruce told me that you remember before 1948, nobody ever thought there was going to be an Israel. Whoever thought there would be an Israel? Whoever thought a Jew could fight and raise the head again? But it happened. We've been up and down. We just want to stay up. Next time, with God's help, we'll be speaking about a lady named Gertrude Berg, who is an absolute perfect example of a successful Jewish comedian who definitely brightened people's lives back in the days of radio, then TV, and she was a paragon of never, ever, ever giving up. So we'll deal with Molly Goldberg, whose real name was Gertie, next time. Next taping in Israel.
la la la